Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Rida bin Kamarul Zaman and my metric number is 11DKA19F1055. So today I want to explain about flakiness and elongation index test simulation. Okay, before we start any experiment, we need to wear the proper personal protective equipment (PPE) like eye protection, hand protection, foot protection, respiratory protection, and body protection. Flakiness and elongation index test. Okay, today I will describe step-by-step procedures to conduct flakiness index and elongation index test for aggregate. The flakiness index and elongation index tests for aggregate are conducted by using BS 812 Part 1. So the flakiness index test will be described, followed by the elongation index test. Flakiness index test. The aggregate particle is considered flaky if its thickness is less than 0.6 times the mean sieve size of the size fraction. Flaky aggregate is not desired due to improper orientation of aggregate particle during mixing and break during compaction, thus affect load carry capacity of the asphalt mix. The objective: to determine the flakiness index of aggregate sample. The flakiness index test requires the following apparatus: thickness gauge, a BS test sieve, mechanical sieve shaker, tray, and balance. Procedure: initially weigh each of the individual sieve size used in the analysis. Secure a representative sample of aggregate. Conduct sieve analysis on approximately 2 kg of aggregate sample with using the selected BS test sieve size. Discard all aggregate retained on the 63 mm BS test sieve and all aggregate passing the 6.30 mm BS test sieve. Weigh each individually sized fraction retained on the test sieve, other than 63 mm, and store them in separate tray with their size marked on the tray. Sum the mass for all size fraction M1. Calculate the individual percentage retained aggregate on each of the various sieve. Discard any aggregate which the mass is 5% or less of mass M1. Record the mass remain M2, which is the total weight of the aggregate exclude the weight of the size of less 5% of weight. Using the gauge, select the thickness gauge approximately to the size fraction under test. The gauge each particle. Refer to the Table 1 of Highway Laboratory Test Manual. Combine and weigh all the particles passing the gauge M3. Calculate the flakiness index, and the flakiness index shall be reported to the nearest whole number. Elongation index test. The aggregate particle is considered elongate if its length is more than 1.8 times the mean dimension of the size fraction. Elongate aggregate is not desired due to improper orientation of aggregate particle during mixing and break during compaction, thus reduce the strength of the asphalt mix. The objective: to determine the elongation index of aggregate sample. The elongation index test requires the following apparatus: length gauge, BS test sieve, mechanical sieve shaker, tray, and balance. The procedure. Initially, weigh each of the individual sieve size using the analysis. Secure a representative sample of aggregate. Conduct sieve analysis on approximately 2 kg of aggregate sample with using the selected BS test sieve size. Discard all aggregate retained on the 50.0 mm BS test sieve and all aggregate passing the 6.30 mm BS test sieve. Weigh each individually sized fraction retained on the test sieve other than 50 mm BS test sieve and store them in separate tray with their size marked on the tray. Sum the mass for all size fraction M1. Calculate the individual percentage retained aggregate on each of the various sieves. Discard any aggregate which the mass is 5% or less than mass M1. Record the mass remain M2. Using the gauge, select the length gauge appropriate to the size fraction under test and gauge early particles separate by hand. Refer to Table 2 of Highway Laboratory Test Manual. Combine all the weight elongate particle passing the gauge M3. Calculate the elongation index. The elongation index shall be reported to the nearest whole number. Thank you.